managers develop throughout your organization, having them understand exactly what engagement is about, the role they play in the whole engagement scheme. It's not just the organization that comes back and our scores were very low. Well, that comes back down to every manager. Welcome to the CEO series. If it's Friday, it's the CEO series. Our guest today is Craig Zabransky, travel writer, author, and former management consultant. As Craig made the transition, he took a year-long sabbatical as he decided to leave Wall Street and to pursue his passion for travel. To date, he has traveled through more than 55 countries, 40 states, 5 continents, and is still traveling from his home in the Florida Keys, where he recently published his book, Gifts from the Road, Discovering Mindset Moments. So Craig, thank you for being a guest and thank you for being here. Glad to have you.
Ron, it's great to be on the show. Thanks so much for having me.
You know, your whole life from making that transition out of corporate into doing what you really wanted to do has always amazed me, and that's why I'm glad to have you on as a guest. So walk us through the thought process of putting together a book centered around mindsets, because normally we travel for an experience, but how does the mindset piece tie into that?
Well, sure, Ron. Again, thanks for having me on. And the reason that the book is about mindsets is because when I think we travel, I believe travel is a gateway to life change. So if we start to travel, we can actually understand more about not just the places that we're going, but also a little bit more about ourselves. We actually find ourselves in moments where we are truly what we're set here to do, because we remove everything else from our daily grind, our responsibilities, whatever we set ourselves up with, and we're actually free to think differently and choose differently. And a lot of times we clog all our trips up with too much in our itinerary. I'm a firm believer of leaving space, because that space allows us to truly figure out what we're here to do and really develop into ourselves. Now, for me, writing the book itself really came from my podcast. So when I first started travel writing, I came and I started to do stories. I freelanced, and then I created my own site, Stayingadventurous.com, my travel blog. And I've been freelancing ever since, but I realized I love to tell stories, and I got to be a guest on a few podcasts, and then I started to develop my own. And so I've had a podcast, Stayingadventurous, for a while. And one of the things that I always put in my podcast was this mindset moment, something from that trip, that travel experience that I would take. And I think that I learned a lesson there, and then I could take that to any trip moving forward. It was something about that place that was obvious, let's say, but also it's true about any place or any future travel experience that you have. So I had this, 3 to 5 minute segment. And then I thought, wow, this would be great to create into an audiobook. So I started writing a draft for an audiobook. And then that's where the whole, book process began.
Okay. That's cool. Your takeaway. So was the takeaway based on that country, or was the takeaway being the mindset you were in a relaxed mode?
It's a little bit of both. Like, depending on where I was going, I would explain the situations of what I did in that. Some of them are really based on the spot, because it's right in front of you and it's really obvious to develop it. Another one was kind of like the mind of why I went to that experience. And I learned, because I was a little bit open to things. And that's when I discovered doing something a little different. And I said, hey, I need to do this on every trip moving forward.
Okay. So if you think of, because at one point, I think you did a trip to Mexico in an immersion program for language.
I went to the immersion program. I actually when I went to Mexico, as they asked me if I spoke Spanish, I went back into consulting for a while, and I said, sure. You always say yes, and then you try to figure it out later, but I did. I had some immersion. At first, I went to Costa Rica, was my first trip, and I started with Spanish immersion classes. And I figured, hey, I could surf, I could learn Spanish. What a great way. So I was building a skill set. Actually, why I took time off, because back when I took time off in, the mid 2000s, it was kind of like to have a gap on your resume. What are you doing? Like my mom thought, like, you went to college. Like, what about your degree? What about your degree? Well, I'm still going to have my college degree and all those experiences. But it was a bit scary. Now there's so many more people doing it and having gaps on resumes for multiple reasons. Yeah. But back then it was just kind of like, it was something that you just didn't do as much. So it was a big step. And I went and I said, I'm going to learn a skill too. And that's when I went down and really just stuck my head into a Spanish immersion school on the beach. Surfing in Spanish was a good way to spend a few weeks.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds cool. You're right about the mindset of recruiters at that time. That was kind of a dark spot if they saw that. But now that's an advantage, because you're thinking you've been exposed to something else in doing that. So of all the travel when I was reading through that 55 countries, before COVID, I traveled every week. So I understand that, that concept of travel, but mine was business. So 55 countries, mindsets. Which one of the mindsets sticks out to you of all the countries that you've traveled to? Was there any particular moment that you said, wow, this is way cooler than the others, or whatever it may be?
Every place is different, because you could go to a place, like there's a couple of spots that might not be on people's radar. Like, let's say a trip I took to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And you're like, well, Harrisburg. And I'm like, well, every place has charm. You just got to find it. But Harrisburg, what I discovered was I knew a lot about Pennsylvania, but it's a capital city. And I think a lot of times we discredit capital cities, or we want to get into the countryside or get to the beach when we're on holiday, and we don't realize how much is put into a capital, how that's kind of the heartbeat of a place, not just from a political standpoint, but also from all the museums, all the culture, like everything comes to this capital city. And even Harrisburg in Pennsylvania has a pretty incredible history for, being the Keystone State in the American Revolution. A lot of people always think Philadelphia, but a lot of that has been transported into Harrisburg. And it was just kind of a unique thing that I never really considered. And it really made me look to capital cities. And that's kind of one that's not necessarily a favorite, but it's kind of like a curveball. And I think you could find those things. Another great example is an obvious one is Savannah. And I know, Ron, that you're a walker, so you like to get up and walk. But walking a city is it's a true way to really discover so much about a place. And Savannah is built for walking. I mean, they even let you, when you go into a bar, they ask if you want one for the road, not because you're driving, but because you could actually walk with a cocktail. Like, they encourage so much walking in that city that everyone just walks around, and they have all the beautiful little squares, and you go in between restaurants, and it's really a very walkable city. But there's so many neighborhoods in every city that are walkable. Yeah. So it's an amazing place.
Yeah, I have a friend that lives there. That's on my bucket list to do that. So are you a resort vacationer versus a city vacationer? Which one is your preference? No, sure. I mean, I think a lot of people, I think it's, my site is called Stayingadventurous, right? And adventure is something different for everyone. So some people need to go to the resorts to feel comfortable at first. Okay. But I remember doing a podcast, and I was interviewing someone who was in Playa del Carmen, and in Mexico, and they went to an all-inclusive resort. It's my cousin. I was talking to him. It wasn't a real interview. We were just talking over the holidays. And he mentioned how his favorite day was when they finally went outside the walls of the resort. Okay. But because he was actually able to appreciate the safety and the concern, and then he got to go out and felt comfortable. But he pushed his limits a little bit. And I think that's what Stayingadventurous does. And I think that's the best place for everyone to travel. There's not a particular place. It's where you are on your radar, and to push it a little bit so that you're on that edge, what I like to call that adventurous edge, or staying adventurous. Okay. For people that have been impacted by COVID, maybe have been laid off, are there any suggestions that you could give to someone that's in that spot of just about maybe exploring a city, or trying to develop a mindset to take away the other thoughts that are coming through?
Yeah, no, well, I develop. If you focus on what you have or what you don't have, and like not having a job and all that, it's definitely, it's not going to get necessarily better with your mind. So I think is, where do you put your thoughts? And I guess it's always comes back to your passion. Now, and I think other places, for me, travel's a passion. So going to new places is so important. And it's been a challenge through COVID to get out there. I mean, I've explored a lot of Florida, where I live in Florida, because we're allowed to freely move, and things have opened up a little bit faster here than other places in the world. And so I've had that opportunity and I've taken it. But I think for the people who have been laid off, or the people that are struggling, is to find what your passion is. And sometimes it could be in a book. And I think it's about learning something. It's about discovering something. It's definitely not about turning on CNN or Fox or any of those channels and getting caught up in the daily narrative over and over again, like hitting you in the face. That's not going to let you go inside yourself in the same way that if you followed things that you really liked. I always say go back to when you were a kid. I mean, my parents took me around. It was my favorite thing when we went somewhere, like travel. And it's always been a huge part of me. So it's like I would go back to what you truly loved. And if you can't do it physically, we could always do it by searching. I mean, we have access to the web that has a bazillion stories to read, or books, and et cetera.
Do you research your travel spots, like your next destination? Do you go online and research it and kind of plot it out, or you just get there and you go from there?
I think there's definitely a little bit of both. Like I recommend, for me, I recommend is also to leave space in your itinerary, because you never know what's going to happen when you're there. You don't know if events are taking place that happen to be that week. And of course, if it's a super popular event, you would know it from your research online. But I like to do one thing a day. So I'll have a set, like, let's do this today, let's do that tomorrow. And I'm never about making sure that I see everything or every possible. I'm definitely not a checklist traveler, and I don't think that's a good way to go through it. If I spend more time in a museum because I loved it, let's say, I'm always going to cherish that. And then maybe I missed something else. That's okay, because I was focused. My mindset was the ability to focus on being present to what I was experiencing. And I think that's more important than experiencing more. It's like, if I really like something, you focus on it, spend time with it, really enjoy it, as opposed to just making sure I check everything.
Okay. So when you were traveling, because you did some international travel when you were a consultant.
Yes.
Were you using that model at that time and didn't know that this would come into something else, or you just got to a city? I think the last big project you worked on was it in Mexico? Was it?
Mexico City, yeah. Well, I mean, I did San Francisco after that, which is, a huge city. A lot of people love. I got 3 months there, so that was definitely a joy. But really, the big project was over a year and a half in Mexico City, and I loved it. I loved it there. Obviously, it's why I write so much. The book itself has Mexico chapters. All my stories. It's so much about Mexico, because it is truly a unique and remarkable destination.
Yeah. So I struggle with that, because pre-COVID, almost 80% of the time I was on the road. I was either in Hong Kong, Singapore, Kuala Lumpur. But I'd get it on a Friday, Saturday I'd cool out, and Sunday I'd cool out, and Monday I was work. And people would say, how was the city? I didn't see it because I was working.
Yeah, no, and I think there's a lot, and that's what made me make the transition. I mean, Ron, when I graduated university, and I was working in financial markets, and I chose it because those cities that you mentioned, as well as like London, Tokyo, those were like the places where I thought I'd be able to go to those great cities. And I'm like, all right. And then I realized, shortly after, I took my first job, and they're like, we're going to send you to London for 2 weeks of training. I wasn't even sure what I was going to do, but I knew I was going to London. I thought it was great, you know? But then you realize, you get to have a nice dinner at one of the top restaurants, and that's about the best, because you're working all day. And of course, I would spend the weekends too, and a lot. But what I realized is that I wanted to explore a different side of the city. And that's what that's what forced me to take that sabbatical, forced me, I should say. But really, my desire came true. I'm like, I really need to see the world a little differently. And, not just these wonderful destinations which I got to travel to, but really experience them on a different level. And that's what changed me.
Yeah, I remember you took that sabbatical. I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool to take a year off and do something like that. Yeah. Was it structured, or you just said, you know what, I'm going to try this today, maybe this next month? Or how did you plan that sabbatical?
Yeah, I put a little bit. It's funny because today it would be so much easier to plan because we have so much online. Back when I did it, I mean, we had a Lonely Planet book, like everything was paper, and like you'd go to an internet cafe at best to send an email. Like it was so different than everything in your phone and 1,000 reviews on TripAdvisor. It's just an amazingly, regardless of where you are in the world, it seems. But for me, like we mentioned, I set up shop and I said, I'm going to a school in Costa Rica to swim and surf. And then, I had 2 weeks of school, and then I was flying back in 8 weeks to see if I liked it. So I left 6 weeks open, and I figured I would figure it out when you're there. And that's about how I spent most of that time. I came back for the holidays. I was actually planning to go around the world, but strangely enough, in 2004, unfortunately, sadly enough, I should say, they had that big tsunami in Sri Lanka and Thailand. And a lot of places that I wanted to go over there were really shut off. And I was like, well, maybe I could help because I had a consulting management background. I worked for investment banks, but it was very hard to get like a volunteer position where I thought I could use my skill sets. So that kind of adjusted my entire travels because, here I am. I saved this money. I don't have enough to save a lot, but I'm like, I really need this to develop myself too. So I actually packed in New York. I remember packing a little bit for airplanes, downtown, sending supplies to Sri Lanka. And then I left in the new year again to start more adventure.
Oh, wow. When you think about, the transition you went through, sabbatical, if you could give someone advice who was thinking about taking some time off and going on a 1 month or whatever it is, what advice would you give? What advice would you give?
I mean, besides just take it, you have to take it. I think one of the strangest things to me is when people switch jobs and they don't take any time in between.
Yeah.
And I always say, take a few weeks. Like they don't need, like it's not an emergency. If you run straight to the next job, you never have that time to unwind a little bit, especially because a lot of times people are leaving in an unhappy situation or they're going to something better. But just a few weeks in between is a great way. And I think that even if you take that small little sabbatical, whether it's do things around the house, make it a little bit more of a staycation, explore your local neighborhoods, even local city, do something, attend a day baseball game perhaps or anything, do something fun. If you have a family, spend time with them. And before you jump right back into working, and then you'll start to understand a little bit of that balance a little bit. And I think that's sabbatical. Of course, I recommend take months. But if people are really nervous, I mean, the little 2 weeks in between is a great start. And I think that's something that I would always recommend to people who are about to transition jobs.
Yeah. Well, when you did that, my situation came up and I left the company I was with, and I think I had 6 months severance or whatever it was. And I took maybe I think I took 2 months off. I said I was going to start looking for a job in 3 months. And we had a house down on Myrtle Beach, and we went there and just kind of sat around every day. Yeah. I didn't do anything, nothing, but just think about the next stage. And it was beneficial to do that, because when you make the transition from Friday to Monday to another job, you're carrying all that luggage.
Yes, you don't let it go. You don't break free from it, as your last guest would mention. You're carrying it with you the whole time, and you don't want to carry bad stuff into the next place. Let it go. Give time, unwind. Learn a little bit more about yourself when you can. Spend a little alone time. As an only child, I'm a big fan of Craig time. I like to call it, like time just for me to settle and think and be and understand who I am. Because
I like that.
Yeah, but we're on this journey. Like we're all on this journey, even though people are passengers on our journey for, a tremendous amount of time, multiple years, and it's great. We want them there. We're the only one who starts and finishes at the same time for us. So it's just important to know who we are, I think. And I think that's why I always recommend travel, because it's such a gateway to a potential life change, when you're out there. And I think people are afraid to go by themselves a little bit, but I think that's part of it, or at least have a little bit of your self-time when you're traveling, and a lot of people escape into a book or a poolside. And I think that's important because your mind starts to go, and into great directions, which is great for you.
Yeah. Well, here in the Middle East and in a lot of countries, you have 30 days And everyone in these countries, they take the full 30 days because 80% of the 80 to 85% of the population are expats. So that's that's travel time and all of that. So people take that. But I read an article one time that said that Americans, we tend to take less vacation time. And I know at the time that I was at Martha Stewart, people would have on their vacation balance, they'd still have time left over because they didn't take the time to go away on vacation. Can you talk us through the benefits of having a 2-week session and maybe going away for a week, as opposed to one guy said in an article I read, he took every Friday off for half the year. So he was basically working Monday through Thursday for 6 months.
Yeah, and that's an interesting strategy to take. And if it works for you, and if you're going to use that Friday, to do different things, especially family time, whatever. Just like Craig time if it was me. But I think truly, it's about when you take the second week is when it starts. So I think 1 week, it's not really even fully a vacation. For me, it was always like, I remember when I was in Costa Rica and I first took that sabbatical. And the longest trip I ever took, I think, was like 2.5 weeks before that, 18 days, coupling in both weekends. And then I was like, wow, I'm not going back for another like 6 weeks, and it just really starts to settle in. And like, we're talking about mindset, it changes the way you think about your holiday, your days, and everything. And I think we all need that long of a break every once in a while. Now we all work, we all have responsibilities. I'm not saying do it all the time, but I'm saying to do it once, in a lifetime is I can't ever understand why everyone wouldn't do it multiple times in a lifetime. Yeah.
Well, do you think that's because they've never tried it? And maybe the model is see everybody else taking Fridays off. They take 3 days this week and they split it up in pieces.
Yeah. And I think they try to maximize their trips. They try to get the certain number of hours to do as many things as they can, and to see as much so they could go back to their cocktail parties and talk about how they've been here and been there. And I think that's a status too. And I think that's a mistake because it doesn't really matter where you've been. I know I mentioned I've been to 55 countries, etc. But it's just to give a perspective that I've traveled a lot. But really, I would send. How many times did I spend more time in a place than, to really appreciate it and experience? And then that's how you're able to truly understand the culture or a place, whether or not you're living there for a while as an expat and really experiencing. And I think those are the kind of travel experiences that even move you. I know you're out there for business, but when you have weekend after weekend, as I did in Mexico City for a while, I got to really appreciate Mexico. And then sometimes instead of traveling home, I would travel to unique places, like to go see the butterfly migration, the monarch butterflies. It's just a few hours from Mexico. And like, that was my weekend after that. And you start to get into it a little bit. And that's the kind of travel that really moves or changes you. Is what I believe. It's what I try to encourage on Stay Adventurous. Yeah. These are some of the mindsets we talk about in the book a little bit.
Well, the butterflies, the migration or whatever it is, that is, that's a key point because that's something that you would not normally do. And just a fact of going there and seeing that happen, it gives you kind of a different connection to the city, of whoever that would be. Right. But my point coming back is that do you think it's a U.S. perspective? Because I heard that here is that they take the full 30 days and we'll take a weekend here and there. So this is what happened to me the first time I took the 30 days and I was living in Saudi Arabia. I called back into the office in the following week. And my assistant said, "Sir, why are you calling?" I said, "Just calling to check in to make sure." He said, "Sir, we got this." He said, "You're on holiday. You don't call in on holiday. If we need you, we'll call you. But other than that." Yeah. And I'm like, "Okay, thank you very much. I will see you in 3.5 weeks." Right. And that was the end of it. But that was that mindset said, you got to check in. I can't take a full week because things are tight now.
Right. Yeah, and I would see it all the time when I was working in management consulting. And it was always just like, you could take a week off. We got this. Or like the world's not going to shift. And I don't know if it's like we're always working in like we're in an ER at every place that we are. I mean, now we should understand what the ER is really like, especially after this last year. It's a lot different than our jobs. So we should have an understanding of like everything's going to be okay in another week. We could make that decision a little bit later. We could let it unfold like it's all right, and it's not going to be any slight against you or anything like that. If you have your ducks in a row and your control situation, you should be able to take a few weeks off a year without any issue. And it is, when I travel around the world, people always say this about Americans. I'm an American and I'm proud of it. But I'm certainly not that type of American. Like I used to always take all my days. I used to take multiple week vacations. I used to try to maximize everything. I remember getting 5 weeks in consulting and I took it all, like always. Okay. So I never had that issue. So it's almost hard at times to relate. I feel like it's like we're talking different languages sometimes when I'm chatting with people who seem to never be able to take a vacation day.
Yeah. Yeah. But that mindset permeates an entire workforce.
It does.
So the offshoot of that is that you have people that are basically burned out. I've read an article about a company that put in a policy that they said you had to take your vacation in weeks.
Right.
And it will give you an extra $2,500 US for your vacation. But there was a catch. The catch was that if you logged in to work, you had to pay it back. Because they saw people were coming back from vacations and they were worn out. They were still tired. They hadn't really decompressed. And I said, that's a pretty cool idea. You say, okay, you're off. Don't do work. So lock them out of the system.
No, it's fine. And that type of company would appeal to me if I ever decide to go back to the corporate realm. Yeah. I mean, it's that kind of, attitude. And I think it comes from the top down as well. Like if your boss isn't taking time off, it's kind of permeates the fact like, oh, he never takes a day off. Then you feel like, well, I can't take a day off. So like if the leadership doesn't let it go and take time and value it, well, then why would anyone else downline probably value it the same way? I knew like the bosses that was consulting were always, and they would be on the road working. And that was just kind of that culture that was creating. So I knew my days in consulting, like that was not the lifestyle that I wanted to leave full time. I got to travel, I got to do things, and it was some amazing projects, met amazing people. But I knew I wasn't going to be sitting there in my 50s as a partner, like missing out on so much of what what I'm able to do now working for myself and actually living here in the Florida Keys as well.
Yeah. So leadership. So do you think this is from an organizational perspective, if you could talk to a leader or CEO and give them insights on mindsets and what they could do to reinvigorate the workforce post-COVID, what kind of advice would you give them as it relates to the topic we're talking about? The Craig time or...
Yeah, no, and I think it's like, I think it's like I don't think you wait till post-COVID unless like you're hiring a new workforce. But if you're working with people now, I think you bring them together and you talk about what has been their passions. What have they been focused on outside of work, that they've had more time at home, that they've had more time with, family locally, or that they've missed certain things. Like what are things that they want to do when it's more free to travel again, but to see, places in the world, or to see family that they haven't seen in a year. To focus a little bit more on the personal aspect, I think would be good than actually focusing on like, well, once it's open, you're back in the office and then we're going to start, hit the ground running kind of speech. I don't know if that's going to go well, because I think people are just a little bit like off kilter, because this really shook the world in a way that I've never seen in my lifetime, or, we could argue hasn't been seen in centuries or ever practically. This is a pretty monumental shift. And I think, if you're a leader of a company, you can't focus on, distracting and say, all right, just go to work and like, let's forget about what else is out there. I think you need to talk it through, but focus on the positives. Like what was something great that you did during the time that was really positive or uplifting that you've seen, and then share that with the group. And if everyone shared a positive, then that starts you off on a positive mindset or a positive focus. And that probably will help coming back together as a group or as a company, a family company, I guess, or even.
I read a white paper the other day. I'm kind of a white paper fanatic. Microsoft Trend Index is called 2021. And they started surveying their people the first week of lockdown. and getting all of this information and trying to figure out, how can we build a new model going forward.
Mm-hmm.
And the concept was based on a documentary I saw a while back. It says you design from disaster. What happened? Why did it happen? What can we do to prevent it going forward? So they surveyed 100,000 people of Microsoft employees, and they were consistently pulsing data points to try and figure out relationships, how they can build beyond that. And it's talking about the same thing. It says capture what's working, what's not working,
right.
and how can we fix it? Because I have a client in Saudi Arabia says that as soon as the governance is lifted, he wants everybody back in the office. And I said,
right.
It's not going to work.
Right.
It is not going to work. So if you're talking to a CEO team of people, and we have CEOs that listen to our show, what would be your advice in giving them, tying into Craig time, tying into concept that you're talking about of just exploring and getting your people to take those days or whatever it is?
Well, I think you need to take those days, but I mean, for the CEOs to bring people back, I think probably people miss human touch, human connection a lot. A lot of people have been in a bit of a lockdown, I think, unable to travel, unable to move, seeing the same people. And so I think like some sort of human interaction in a way of some level is critical, bringing us back, because we are a humanity. I also think people have had time to change their values. And I think that's an important thing. Like, what do they value in the world today? Like, what do they value about their lives and also about their company? So I think a value pitch or some kind of value about their jobs, and is it just a paycheck? Well, then that's going to be a problem moving forward, especially because people are going to shift and be like, you know what? The only thing I liked about this job was the people I worked with, and for the last year, I haven't talked to them except on a Zoom. I'm not going to stick around with the same level of engagement that I probably had in the past. So I really think that the value in some kind of way of shifting to understanding what people's values are, and also that probably emulates from what the company's values are. Like, has the company's value shifted? Are we just for profit? Are we going to do something special? Is there any other missions here that make us more, socially? Are we trying to help shift the world in a certain way? And I think those kind of things, and I see companies grappling with today. CEOs are making blatant statements. I'm not necessarily agreeing with all of them necessarily out there, but that's a part of it. And I think some are going to make mistakes. Others are also going to figure out what their companies are and what they want to stand for. And I think it might be a little rough for a while, but it should shake out. And I think the future of a corporation will be more than just for the shareholders. And I think COVID's definitely, or this time away, because of the shift in values, will help create that shift moving forward.
You need to do a white paper, because everything you touched on has come across in 3 of the latest white papers I've read, concerning that human-centric workforce, based on purpose. What is the purpose of the organization?
Sure.
Telling a vision.
Yeah,
story.
I'm a writer. I don't know if I have all those technical terms anymore, but I mean, I remember like starting to write white papers on T+1 and, trading days from settlement in 1 day and STP, straight through processing, adding thoughts. That's a long time ago, me and my white paper moments. So I don't know if I'm ready to jump right back in.
I tell you, everything you touched on is being talked about, in organizations today, as to how we're going to reimagine this workforce. So I did a speech yesterday out of India, and I covered the 3 W's: work, workplace, workforce. And all the topics that you talked about, I tied all of those in. Like, what is the purpose behind what we do as an organization? Right. And when you look around the graphic that I used, everything that you spoke of was being addressed. People don't get it.
Maybe I was listening to your speech. Maybe nah.
Yeah. So if I can go back, I said, well, Craig gave me some pointers, to use on this. But that was important. What is the purpose? Yeah. So how can we tie the mission? Because one of the things I said in that speech was that you can't. A person that's working on the line, the line is a euphemism for the lowest point of the org chart.
Sure.
Is not excited about want to be the number one in your market, or the number one in revenue, and all those things. So how do you tell that story?
Right.
So that the person at the lowest point can understand that, and everything you spoke of, resonated to that. If you were the CEO of a company, what would be how would you tie that down to people, the people quotient? You know, Stayingadventurous, you had a team of 15, 20 people and it just mushroomed to X amount.
I mean, besides making sure that they all take 2 weeks vacation, I mean, to truly know them themselves. Well, I mean, if I was the CEO of Stayingadventurous, it would probably be forcing people to take adventures. And I think it would come back with, to challenge themselves a little bit outside of where their comfort zone is, to take the next step, to just kind of facilitate that environment for people too. And I'm not sure exactly how you would do that. I mean, you could do surveys back, but I mean, it would be about engaging people to take the trip that they've always wanted to and push them to do the thing that they always wanted to do in a way, and then know that that's going to go forward. And I think when you see people happy, when you see your clients happy, if there's a way to measure that, that'll come back. When you get, I'm a tour guide here in the Florida Keys too. So I do a food tour down here in Isle Morada, and I'm a guide. And when I read the reviews and people really enjoy it, it's not my company, but when they mention my name and they give 5 stars, and it's just kind of like, yeah, they really got engaged. They really enjoyed the trip. And I think that kind of feedback will, for someone that's me on the line too. I'm on the line there. So it's just kind of like, you really made a difference in this person's, those moments, those hours in that person's life. You really had a good, for their vacation. I think that's a big way to come back. So somehow I'd have to measure that in some sort of way, that the clients that we serve come back with, experiences that they were pushed a little bit into an adventurous situation, but yet they were comfortable and it really shifted their life. I mean, because that's what it's all about, I think, in travel, shifting our mindset or shifting who we are, to see the world a little bit differently. And I think if, as a CEO, that would be the goal, is to have the clients do that. Okay.
I'm doing some work for an airline here in Dubai, and we did a session for leaders on telling a vision story, which is the same thing you're talking about. Is that number one revenue? How do you take that down to, say, the baggage handlers? Right. And what do they mean from that? So as we're talking through, and we talk through the CEO mindset, because one of the other key points that's coming up on the transition is that leaders, a new leader for post-COVID, if there is such a thing, than the leader pre-COVID, which was interested in the numbers, KPIs, we need this, we need that. And on this side is saying well-being, take your 2 weeks. Are you seeing that transition? Are you hearing those kind of talks? Because I've been reading a lot about that.
Yeah, no, well, what's interesting is I think it needs to happen if it's not happening, and I think you say post-COVID, I mean, there's definitely a post-COVID world. Yeah. And it goes back to the shifts in the values of what people are going to have. So some employees, they're going to be thankful probably to come back and have a job and start a life again. In a way that they're earning and working for themselves and creating. Because I think creation of your own is so important. Like, we can't rely on all gifting all the time, of like, oh, I'm getting paid to, because it's a crisis. We have to go out, and everyone's going to want to build something or be a part of something and do something, because that's what builds us, that's what builds our character, and I think develops our humanity and pushes us forward. So if we have a lot of people who are not, working, and I'm not for like, well, let's just give them any job. I don't think the job has to matter to them. But in a way, they also have to produce something with their lives to really feel valued. They have to produce value. So what that value is what's going to shift. It's not just going to be, I'm getting money back, but as part of within a corporation, I'm making a difference because, this, if you're working with airlines, like, how many people are going to be happy to travel again and just get to places? Like, it should be, we see a couple of, videos and stuff of unhappy travelers all the time. But I mean, I think a lot of people can't wait to get back on a plane and visit someone on the other side of the world. And I think there's going to be a lot of people who should be smiling when they get there and happy that, wow, we could do this again. And we're out there again. So I think there should be a lot of happy moments in the travel space moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, things are opening up. I saw some stats on the airplane travel in U.S. and people were going all over the place. All there are certain hot spots that I would suggest for people not to go to. So if I'm sitting around and I'm, COVID period.
Yes.
You lived in New York. I lived in the New York suburbs, and people would ask me, "Have you ever been to, say, the Empire State Building?" No. So we live in these cities. Yeah, right. So we live in these cities, and we don't explore it. We don't. I was there one time myself. We don't explore it. So if I'm struggling now, trying to figure out, what's going to be next and all these things, what advice would you give to someone? Because when you think of travel, you're thinking about getting on a flight and flying to Paris or Rome or one of the cool cities. But what if I don't have the finances for that? What can I do in my city and explore that? Because I say that to say that we don't explore the cities we're in.
No, and it's true. We don't. We don't. And it's great to live in the Florida Keys for me, because I have like Key West is, it's still 85 miles from me. I live in Almirada. But it's nice to be like, oh, my friends are coming down. Maybe I'll go have Friday night down in Key West, because it's like a vacation paradise. And I don't go down there often, but there's a couple attractions there and stuff. So within your own area, I think there's always opportunity. But the thing that I think is the best to take a look at, especially, is I think the crowded places, where they pack more volume, is not going to actually be what people probably want or desire. I think actually getting in touch with nature and going outside in a different way is probably the trip to do. Because one, you could have a smaller group, you could focus on it, but obviously new people, you could add other folks and friends you haven't seen in a while, but just stay together. And whether it's going out on you could do a desert safari out where you are, spend the night in the tents, or here we have nature and camping, and there's a lot of retreats. For me, luxury is always part of the travel experience. So I have Stayingadventurous.com. Just started stayluxurious.com. And so I have a new site, so that's very exciting news. But I think within that luxury space is it's a luxury to be out into nature as well. And I think just to experience nature, because I think we're forgetting a little bit about it. We're staying a little bit too much in our own bubble, and we're kind of afraid to be outside in nature. And that fear is, I think, misrepresented in a lot of ways. I'm not saying there aren't things to be concerned about, but nature is part of us. We're part of it. We can't disconnect from it. And I think connecting to it, actually, they talk about boosting immune systems and being good for us and all these things. So we need to reconnect with that. And I think that's where I would focus on, if I haven't taken a trip in a while, is to really focus on really getting out there and experiencing, this wonderful world that we live in, the outside of nature, whether it's state parks, national parks, or just going to the beach or anywhere.
Yeah. Well, my walking is about that, because it's something for me, and this is just kind of a personal thing. It's something about me going outside when it's dark outside, because there's no traffic, there's no people, and you have all your thoughts to yourself. There's no distractions. That's Ron.
That's Ron time, right? I mean, that's Ron time.
Yeah. Ron time. Yeah. So I got me one now, right? Ron time is the walkabout. Yeah. So that's cool. That's cool. So thank you. One other question I want to ask you is that in your newfound life, that what you're doing, what is your next step? I mean, how are you going to take it from this point you're at now? I mean, because you've connected with people all over the world. This is travel is 55 countries. I can't even begin to think of how many countries that is. What's next on the Stay Adventurous? You talked about the new luxury. So tell us a little about that.
Luxury is part of the adventure. And I think I want to curate travel experiences for people, especially coming into this. And I look at moving forward. I started a trip to Mexico City, because people were always like, I'll never go there. And I'm like, Mexico City is probably one of the best cities for city people in the world. And I've spent time in where everyone else will put in their top 10. I've spent not just like weekends there, but like weeks, if not months, in some of these cities that people love. And I'm like, Mexico City needs to be on that list. And people are like, no way, I'm unsafe and all these things. And I'm like, I'll only go with you. So I was like, all right, I'll create a trip. And so I started a long weekend down there. And I haven't taken people, obviously, in the last some time with COVID and everything. But, that was kind of the start with, and I called it Stay Advent Tours. And I think with on the luxury side or stay luxurious, just a little bit more of the curation of a trip for people is where that my direction and where I want to go forward is to help people find that trip, especially now, because I think people are eager and I think people are ready. Some people, have saved and are ready to take a launch into something when the world opens up again. And hopefully I'll be able to help guide them, having the right mindset to take a certain trip. It isn't going to be that great city like Paris or maybe New York, because it's not the same perhaps right now. So maybe where else did you want to go? What else do you want to experience? And then to see where they are in their adventure level, like how far can we push you? How comfortable will you be? How many miles of even a radius from home or from the United States, even if you wanted to go internationally, are you comfortable with at this time? And, that those comfort levels will change as we progress moving forward with everything that's happening in the world today. And, that's where Stayingadventurous, the podcast, and hopefully this book, which is a quick short read, will enable people to just understand and shift the way that they think and take better travel experiences from wherever they decide to go next. Oh, I think I lost you, Ron. Well, I think I can't hear you, Ron, but I will show the book. We'll see if we get. There it is. There's the Stayingadventurous. That's the book for you, everyone. Is it there? You can find it on Amazon. If you search my name,
cool.
Craig Zabranksky.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can. I lost you, so I was just filling airspace, I guess.
No, I love the way you did the pitch. So that was cool. That was cool. You mentioned one thing before we close out. You mentioned buddy travel, and I know the first time I started traveling to Europe, you'll have friends say, "Oh my God, I want to travel with you guys when you go again next time," or whatever it is. Or I travel to Hong Kong, Singapore. Somebody says, "Oh, I want to travel." My opinion, I don't want to travel with anyone because I have different travel kind of protocols or needs, and I don't want to. Can you give us some insights? Because you're a world traveler.
Yeah, no, and I think a lot of people are like that, and I think it's best. Sometimes when you mix two travel things, what are the definition of a compromise is that nobody gets what they want, right? I mean, so especially when you're traveling, and if you're American, if you don't have enough days, like you're not going to want to do what the same other person is going to do. But that doesn't mean that you have to. Just because, if you travel with someone, you can split up. I know it's crazy thoughts, but, if you need Ron time or Craig time or whatever you want to call it, like just because you're in the same city, if you were at home or hanging out with your buddy, doesn't mean you're doing everything 24/7 together. So I think people are always afraid, like, oh, I'd like to travel with you. But then they need to, be by your side the whole time. And that's not necessarily true. You want to go to that museum today? That's fine. I'm going to go sit in the park and hang out and just people watch and just experience, I love sitting in Bryant Park when I'm in New York. I might have been in the Empire State Building once, but I've probably been to Bryant Park over 1,000 times just sitting there and just enjoying it, because that's where I really soak in what it is to be in New York City a lot more than but I could see the Empire State Building from there, actually.
Yeah,
so that,
yeah. For the people that are listening, Bryant Park is situated in the middle of New York. It's right off of 42nd Street. And it's kind of an oasis at lunchtime. People come out. And matter of fact, our office building was right across the street. So sometimes on Fridays, we would have our weekly meetings inside of Bryant Park. At least Maggie and I would. And we would discuss things about the coming week and those kind of things. So
I think it's a great place to have an outside business meeting. Great place. Bryant Park. Yeah. Well, hopefully people are putting it on their list in New York City now when they go.
Okay. So Craig, what's your bucket list look like? You got 55 countries.
What?
Continents. What's on the bucket list?
I talk about bucket lists is the first tip or mindset, because I think a lot of people, in the travel space, it was almost I was like, well, I don't have a bucket list because any trip could be great. And that's true. You could have a great experience on a trip that wasn't on your bucket list, but to have a bucket list is a great idea if there are places that you want to go and experience. And for me, that was Santorini and watching the sunset. It was amazing. I mean, things that are on my bucket list right now. I mean, I have a post about it, the things that I want to do, of course. But I've been to close to. I want to close out all 50 states in the U.S. Before I turn 50. So I have a couple of years left. I'm in my 40s, so I got to make it. I got to get there, and so there's road trips about discovering more of my own country, and it was true because right after I graduated from university. What I decided to do, instead of a lot of people went to Europe or traveled or did something before they got a job, other people went straight into work, as we talked about earlier. I'm not sure what they were thinking because they're going to be working the rest of their lives. But, I took a trip cross country and I saw a lot of this country and a lot of the people. And I'd like to get back out to the few states that I missed. And I know that's definitely one thing on my bucket list for sure.
Okay, cool. Craig, thank you so much.
Oh yeah, thanks, Ron.
And giving us insight, because I think what you've opened up you open up insight for people who have looked at travel as kind of I can do that when I'm able to do it, or as opposed to having that as a part of your growth plan, visiting cities, understanding different cultures and all these kinds of things. I belong to a lot of travel groups, and this is one of the things that came up in one of the groups the other day. A person mentioned the fact that once she started traveling, she had a bad experience with food. And now when she travels, the first thing she wants to do is locate where McDonald's is or Kentucky Fried Chicken or whatever it is, because she says, I don't eat any country's food. I mean, the closed mindset. Yeah. So the mindset piece is cool because you explore and you'll
never get sick from McDonald's, right? I mean, that's perfectly good health. I mean, I don't understand that at all. One of the mindsets in the book. One of the mindsets in the book actually is about eating a local cuisine, and it takes place in Puebla, Mexico, which is an incredible cuisine spot. And I think that's how you learn, because it's not just, I like to call it culture through cuisine. I mean, you learn history, you learn art, you learn, from the family perspective, you learn so much through eating these dishes, and you start asking questions on like, what is this dish from? Oh, it's a mix of Spanish and local indigenous, or, or they brought this from Asia back in the 1500s and then they grew it here. I mean, just Florida in general, right? Citrus, right? Our oranges are not local, right? They came via the Spanish. So it's not local. Florida orange juice would not have happened. But now you have to have your glass when you come in at the visitor center. It's a free glass of orange juice when you drive through. Freshly squeezed, which is nice.
Craig, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Ron. Pleasure.
Website is www.stayingadventurous.com. It's on the site now. Check it out. Check Craig out. Buy his new book and change your mindset. So thank you, Craig. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks. Yeah, I really appreciate it. The book is on Amazon. If you search my name, Craig Zabransky, you can't miss it. There's not a lot there with that last name. But thanks so much, Ron. I really appreciate catching up with you. It's been a long time, but it's great to see you from the other side of the world, too. Both of us not in New York, but cool. Thanks, Ron.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you, man. Thank you.
Bye.